Welcome all. Thank you for joining Women in AI Toronto Masterclass Series. This is our last of the 3 language intelligent masterclasses we conducted in July to unleash AI's potential. My name is Nammi Sriharan. I'm the city lead for Women in AI Toronto. I'm also the executive coach and founder of iResilient Coach. With the commitment to empowering individuals of marginalized background and finding their true potential by overcoming challenges and breaking the barriers to achieve their goal. I'm always happy to connect and support in any way I can. Women in AI is a global network of female experts and professionals in the field of artificial intelligence, working towards gender-inclusive AI that benefits the global society. With over 10,000 members across 140 countries, founded in 2020 in Canada, we are represented in 7 cities across Canada, with over 6,000 followers in LinkedIn. We have organized over 50 successful virtual and in-person events up until now. Our mission is to close the gender gap in the field of AI by educating the next generation of female leaders in AI to increase the female representation and participation in AI. Today's session is moderated by one of our Women in AI volunteers, Sarah Khalid. Sarah is an AI and ML product manager at AlayaCare, where she builds machine learning and optimization innovation for the home healthcare network industry. She is also passionate about writing, community building, and dialogue on human values and meaning. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Nammi, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to today's session. So I'll just start off with covering some basic housekeeping items before we get started with our talk today. And today we'll be discussing the impact of generative AI in industry and how this technology is unblocking potential and feasibility through different use case examples and experiments. So today's webinar will be recorded and there will be some time dedicated to a Q&A at the end. All attendees are welcome to submit their questions using the chat at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And we will ask all attendees for now just to be muted and have cameras off for our session. And during the Q&A, you're more than welcome to come off camera and ask your questions live. So first, I'll start off with an introduction of our wonderful panelists today. We have Rajesh Rangarajan, the head of D3 Labs at Capgemini, who is a pioneering thought leader in generative AI and behavioral sciences. His distinctive approach to intertwining these domains has resulted in groundbreaking experiences reshaping the industry. Rajesh's unique strategic insights aids in guiding businesses through their Gen AI journeys, transforming complex concepts into implementable strategies. Known for his instrumental role in accelerating digital adoption and fostering innovation, Rajesh consistently pushes the boundaries of technology and science. So Rajesh, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited for today's talk, and I'll pass it over to you to kick us off for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for your kind introduction. I'm hoping to live up to the expectations. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rajesh, and I'm here to share my thoughts on generative AI. So before I get started, I just want to make sure you're able to see my screen.
Yeah, Rajesh?
Yeah, I'm just trying to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, good to go.
Okay. Can you see my full screen? Is it clear?
We see the presenter notes version, Rajesh.
Okay. Let me just. Okay, I think you should be fine now.
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you, everybody. Thank you to Nammi and thank you to Sarah for having me in this session. My name is Rajesh Rangarajan, and I represent the organization Capgemini, which is into consulting and IT services there. In my role as the head of D3 Labs, I bring in the worldview of behavioral sciences as well as the generative AI, which is a shiny new toy in town, and everybody talks about it. So the reason why this is extremely interesting for me is because it actually provides a great opportunity for all of us to kind of embrace this technology, which is very near, which is going to be very practical for all of us. And more so, for me, it is more the human AI connection. What is it that we're doing? How do we interact with AI in a language that's very familiar to us, and the AI seems to be very fluent. With that said, what I want to cover for today's presentation, part of today's presentation, is to give you an overview of what's happening in the generative AI space. So why is there so much of traction that's coming from the enterprise side? What are they looking for? Now, as some of the practitioners in the generative AI space, what kind of questions do you think enterprises are asking, and what kind of skills can you have, or which can help, which you can leverage to make build great solutions for the enterprise? I think that's the angle that I want to pursue and share my thoughts here. And at any point in time, if you have any questions, feel free to put it on chat, and I'm happy to answer that. With that said, now I'm sure most of us, or all of us in this room, were not there when the electricity was first invented. Maybe we were just only consuming the capability of that came out of electricity. And likewise, even when internet came, we were mostly consumers of content, and eventually started to build products and services around internet. But it's this version of the generative AI popularized by ChatGPT, is very real, and we are at the cusp of a great revolution. And potentially, we're actually going to, use this technology to kind of build a lot of stuff. And I think it's extremely important for us to not miss this, to the extent that since November 2020, when ChatGPT first, released its GPT-3 version. From there on, it's been a lot of buzz in the marketplace. You see an extremely good adaptive behavior that actually comes in, right from checking out what recipes you can actually cook to what kind of email, how do I write an email, or how do I even plan my holiday. So the quick way of finding out if a technology is mainstream or not is the adaptive behavior that comes. In fact, I don't know if you're aware that you can actually make ChatGPT behave like an interviewer, and you can actually, get you to answer those questions. Now, I think it's for a reason that this has become mainstream, because up until now, the access to AI was only to a select few. And it's probably for the first time that, each one of us gets an opportunity to interact with the AI directly through a language that's very comfortable to us. Now, what I wanted to do is not just to talk and ride onto this hype machine, but rather to look at what is that we can do to actually provide some kind of value there. Now, I borrowed this quote from Naval Ravikant, one of the angel investors, founders of the angel investing group. He actually says something very interesting. He says, you get rich. When I say rich, not just money, wealth, but it's also, the overall intellectual wealth that one can gain, is by providing what the society wants and it does not know how to do it. Now, we are at a point where a lot of conversation is happening around generative AI. People have different notions of what works and what doesn't work. So it's up to us to actually dig into the details, get a lot more curious, and actually build great products and services which can be monetized big time. So as I said, my goal for the next 30 to 40 minutes is to give you an overview of what the enterprise is asking, where the demand is, what kind of questions are coming from organizations and what they want to do, and how can you potentially leverage your skills to build those capabilities, either as individuals or entrepreneurs or as a part of an organization. I'm not used to not having questions, but in case you have questions, feel free to ask me, because otherwise it feels like I'm just talking to people and get a response. Sarah, any questions that has come so far?
No questions yet, Rajesh.
Okay, great. I'm also trying to see. So So what is generative AI? I think it's important for us to first get a level set in this particular area. Each of us have different interpretations, but I try and make it very simple for you. It's a kind of an artificial intelligence that's there, just that it understands natural language the way we speak, and it is able to communicate back. Not just that, not because the NLPs did exist to understand all of that. But I think what's new about this is it is able to generate content, images, multimodal, any format it's able to generate at scale. I think that's the magic. And once we go through the hype cycle, we'll realize that this is here to stay because the applications are going to be very many. And in this case, even if you want to hype up, it's probably paradoxical, but you can even write your own hype about generative AI using ChatGPT or any of those large language models that are available with us. Now, one heuristic to find out if this particular space is just growing or not is to see the number of companies, the kind of investments that actually come into this particular space. This was a research report that was actually released by Stanford. And what I'm showing you is a very dated slide. The number of models have just increased. And I was just sharing to a few colleagues of mine the other day that if you go to something like a Hugging Face today, you'll have about 264,000 models that are there available for people to consume. So everybody finds an application, whether it's a large model that you need or a set of small models. The conversations have changed from how many billion parameters does it exist to the pre-trained nature of the model to whether it's open source. These are kind of conversations that are happening. And the moment you see large enterprises actually investing money into building these foundational capabilities, this is there to stay and it's mainstream. And another way to find that out is how enterprises are now embracing this technology. So in the past, when we had ERP and any of those technologies, or let's say CRM that came up, they were very, very function specific. CRM initially took off from the sales side, and we had people looking at sales management and things like that. And then eventually became a marketing cloud, and then became a service cloud. It just went from one to another. But for the first time, when I say first time, it doesn't mean the large language models never existed. But the moment it's become mainstream, thanks to ChatGPT or the OpenAI's ChatGPT, now every unit with an enterprise is actually looking to say, what can I do to solve a problem using generative AI? So for example, would a call center say, can I make generative AI give me answers to questions that a customer is asking because I have access to the knowledge base within an enterprise, to a marketing organization which is saying, can I generate my content using generative AI, to the extent that, can I create 20 to 30 LinkedIn posts or social media posts, any of those things, or even for HR, which probably was, ends up adopting a technology much later in an enterprise, is now talking about making generative AI available for them to engage with candidates for screening of profiles, or even making knowledge base available to the employees for them to access. So I think for the first time you see across the enterprise, everybody is coming up with use cases. So which means the use cases are not top down. When I say use case, or the kind of applications are not top down, it's not decided at the top. But if each of us were to open a generative AI model today, we'll come up with 100 use cases as to how this is really applicable. And that's where is a sign of it being mainstream. Now, what this has done to this particular space is it just opened up plenty of opportunities. A lot of startups are now looking at how can we leverage this technology? What is the piece that we want to solve in the generative AI? Should it just be a large language model? Are there other aspects that are there? To know that, it's important for us to understand what kinds of use cases are the early starts here. The early start seems to be, about these casual tries, which is, or any decision that is reversible. Can I write an email? Can I generate content? Or can I generate an image out of this one? So these are kind of use cases that are coming up. And these are fairly not so serious kind of use cases that actually shows up initially. And there are plenty of models that are available. It ranges from a very task-specific model to a large language model that can kind of handle all of these things. An example in this case could be, let's say, OpenAI's GPT models can actually handle most of these tasks, as opposed to if you just take a Copilot, can be a fantastic model for just code generation at some level. So, the camp is split between should we take a large model or those small models there. But for us to get to that position, it's important to understand what are the areas where we can actually build. As I said, the enterprises have expressed openness to saying that, hey, what's generative AI? How can it help solve problems? It's incumbent on solution providers to look at and says, how can I actually build use cases? So we at Capgemini, we kind of look at what are the kind of use cases that are likely to solve some of those immediate problems, where the chance of making, the chance of a big mistake is minimal. So to that extent, we don't want to talk about exposing these technologies to a large set of audiences, but want to control within smaller environments for the obvious reasons, like it's still an unproven technology and we just in the process of scaling it up. So as I said, the use cases that are top of mind for most of the enterprises that we engage with are in the area of customer service, where you want to equip the customer executives, experience executives to answer customer questions, or in terms of wealth management, where if you want to engage with a high net worth individual, what kind of interaction or what kind of communication can you provide with them? What kind of investment advice can we look at? Or even to the extent of automating some of the loan processes. Now, it ranges from automation to, rather knowledge management to automation at scale, the kind of use cases that are actually coming up. I mean, what I've given you is a sample set of use cases, but the use cases can be anything. And I said, instead of being top down, I think it makes a lot of sense for enterprises to explore ways and means by which employees get a hang of get to use this particular tool and then generate as many use cases as possible. I mean, this is not just specific to banking. Insurance has also picked up big time, and we are working with very many customers who are in the process of experimenting and finding out what kind of use cases would actually give them better productivity or customer satisfaction, whether it's claims processing or whether it's risk assessment or underwriting or even claims assessment and things like that. So those are areas that are potentially coming up. I'm just giving you some examples. It doesn't necessarily mean that only the ones that you're seeing here are the ones that are likely to come up. From a technology standpoint, I think what we see is that the early wins are in the area of code generation. I'm sure most of you in this particular group would recognize that a code augmenting capability is actually of a great benefit, in the sense a whisperer in AWS or a co-pilot would potentially give a boost into productivity. Likewise, there are areas which were earlier considered to be very difficult to accomplish in terms of synthetic data creation. We see a great amount of use cases coming out in the synthetic data creations for testing using generative AI. I think these are kind of potential that is just to back up a little bit and then summarize what I've said just now, is that generative AI is becoming mainstream, and that's not just like an axiom or a statement. What we see is the momentum is coming from two directions, and which I think are equally important. One is the basic, foundational capabilities that's been built by large enterprises, as well as a startup ecosystem that's actually coming up. And on the other end, enterprises are looking to solve some key problems using generative AI. I think when both of them come together, it actually means a lot of opportunities that are actually emerging for solution providers or even for startups that are actually working in this particular space. Any questions, thoughts before we move forward?
No questions just yet, Rajesh.
Okay. Yeah. So while I have presented this whole structure in a way as though everything is hunky-dory and everybody's looking to embrace, what we should not forget is this is a new piece of technology that is there to stay. And what comes with a new technology is a lot of questions. Some of the common questions that you would have had in your own workspaces or interactions with this engine would be hallucination. You give a question, it does not know, it doesn't have the ability to say, I don't know. This is probably going to answer. Now, it's friendly and nice when we do for casual requests, but when you are actually trying to solve a large problem for an enterprise and things like that, you don't want it to be hallucinating. It's probably better off saying, I don't know the answer, rather than giving you some answers. So one leads to the other, and there are very many questions that are actually coming from enterprises as to what is this generative AI about. The questions actually range from being very educative. It's like, can you give me an idea of what generative AI, what can it do, or how do I justify investing on generative AI? Could be a set of questions, to ethics and responsibilities, like how much of this particular data is without bias, and or how do I protect privacy and things like that, API information. That's on one side, which are very, very basic. The other is an advanced set of questions that we see that are coming from customers who are talking about integrating across the enterprise. Like, they just really want to do some experiments, figure out what's the right kind of models that they want to embrace, and then get it to be a part of all the mainstream applications where they want to integrate and then make this work. So depending on the questions, we see different skills that are actually emerging. So a part of what you saw earlier is more like a consultative selling, or even if you're somebody in the technology space, it's important for you to sell this piece of technology in the right way. When I say sell, it's more about how do you consult with your customers and how do you engage with them. Even within your organization, if you're trying to be the champion for this particular technology. Now, how do you educate people, which includes questions which are very, very basic and elementary, to some things that are very, very nuanced in terms of, how do we have the right architecture in place to scale and things like that. I think those are the kind of questions that are actually coming up from an enterprise standpoint. And what we realize this, as much as we see a lot of questions that are coming up, it's important for us to develop the right kind of framework to be able to get them in the right direction, or even have an approach that's either tactical or strategic. So which is why we have this 2x2 framework, 2x2 matrix, which you see. On one side, you talk about inconsequential decisions, outcomes, and consequential decisions. And on the lower axis, on the x-axis, you see reversible versus irreversible. Amazon would famously call this as a two-way revolving door. Any decision in which you can actually revert or you can roll back your decision is a reversible decision. Like a simple example is on a weekend, if you're trying to watch a particular movie on Netflix and you're spending about 30 minutes time to figuring out which movie to watch, then if you apply this framework, this is probably an inconsequential reversible decision. So you're not going to be greatly wrong by just picking up a movie and watching it for a while before you turn it off. As opposed to, let's say you're trying to move to a new city, which is like an irreversible decision once you make that commitment. And it's very consequential in nature. So, what kind of thought process does one need to apply? So what we did is just make it easy for the corporates or the enterprise is to develop this particular framework. And depending on the enterprise's appetite, we kind of, or the use cases that come, we kind of put them through this particular matrix and filter out where do they fit in and what should be our strategy, our approach to get them to start this whole journey of integrating generative AI inside the enterprise here. Now, why is this step very important? Because unlike other technologies, let's say if we are an ERP or a CRM or any other technology, there were a few choices that existed, and you could probably talk to a few vendors and or enterprises and then get a solution here. But with something like a generative AI, you see, as I mentioned before, there are about 264,000 models that are available. So if you pick a wrong model because it's optimal in size and it's not expensive, and you have very limited knowledge on what it's pre-trained, it can actually show up different kinds of results that you don't expect. So these are some examples that we actually did on models that were not pre-trained for these specific tasks. So for example, I've just simulated this particular experience here, where just give me a second. I just have to. You can see my screen, right? Or
we can still see your presentation.
Okay, just 1 minute. I just have to. Yeah, I want to stop. Just give me a second. I just wanted to make this edit here and then come back. Okay. Sorry, I just had to edit out some piece of information. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So you see this particular example here, we actually asked this, like, I'm trying to create a press release for a cybersecurity, and these are like very, very basic use cases that you can actually, I mean, this particular model was trained for test data. And the moment you put through something like this, you're actually going to get a response that's totally unexpected. Now, it sounds trivial. I mean, that's the kind of nuance that is required for us to select the right kind of model. So this is one example. This particular model has been trained for testing, and you kind of use this for press release, you're going to get different answers. Now, I'm oversimplifying this, but I guess it's to make the point. Like if you're talking about an executive briefing for an annual report, and if it's trained on and if the model has been pre-trained for some other purpose, then you're actually going to get different sets of answers there. Now, I think this is an extreme case of picking a wrong model. The other case is, even if you take something like OpenAI or any of those large models, if it's not being pre-trained for the particular task that you're looking for, or if it's not fine-tuned for the task that you are looking for, it can actually hallucinate and give you answers, which is why it's extremely important for enterprises to actually run smaller experiments inside their enterprise, within their enterprises, within their private spaces, either with their own data or simulated set of data, and then find out which of the models actually works for them. So which means it's a process. So first is to look at what is the appetite for generative AI, does it even exist, and things like that. Then is to look at, can we actually put up some experiment models for experimentation where we can actually figure out by just running some experiments there. Now, once we run those experiments is when the enterprise actually comes to potentially comes to a set of decisions around what kind of models that they actually can take. McKinsey has a very interesting way of characterizing them with the certain archetypes there. Now, they have 3 archetypes there. So like a taker, shaper, and a maker. Typically, the takers are the ones that they take a large language model that's available publicly, and they kind of consume this with, let's say, with just prompt engineering. You prompt it and you get it because it's pre-trained on a particular data, and you actually use this. So those are the takers there. The shapers are the ones that they take a model inside an enterprise. They kind of fine-tune with their own data sets to figure out what's the to get the best out of that particular model that's actually available. And the last one is maker, which is people who are actually going to build a foundational model itself. I mean, not every organization would need that or would have the appetite for a large model for themselves, because it's a lot of work. Now, we had an opportunity to speak to some folks at the Bloomberg, and what we understood that it's a massive effort there. It's a massive effort to stand up our own foundational model there. So enterprises might not, most companies might not do that, which is pretty much the reason why they would leverage some of those models that are available as a part of those hyperscalers, and then, or even some of the smaller models, and then look to fine tune that particular data. So where I'm going with this particular thought is the journey that an enterprise typically takes to get to making generative AI mainstream within an enterprise. The first set of questions are more about being educative in nature, like what's generative AI, what are we doing, what is it about privacy and things like that, is how it starts. But then it gets on to, can I start using some kind of models that will suit some use cases, which leads them to a few experiments there. And then once you run a few experiments and you have a decent handle as to what works and what doesn't work, then you're potentially looking at, what should be the enterprise's approach? Should we just be a taker, maker, or a shaper there? I think that's the path that an enterprise takes. So before I move on, I just want to know if there are any questions, thoughts, comments, Sarah.
Not just yet, Rajesh, around this particular topic. We had just a technical question come in around just accessing the Zoom, but in regards to this, not just yet.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. So no, I think once an enterprise gets to this particular position of looking at what models, I mean, there is a need to justify the ROI that's potentially going to come. which is where a lot of work is done in the academia, as well as in some of the enterprises, which comes back and says, hey, generative AI has a huge potential. For example, McKinsey talks about, 20 to 40% in productivity lift when you use generative AI, especially in the software development lifecycle, whether it's for code generation, code conversion, testing use cases, and things like that. These are good data points because, we are at a stage where nobody would say, I have first-hand knowledge as to what's kind of productivity lift you have. So which is where you kind of deflect this question to some of the experts who are actually making these kind of predictions based on randomized controlled tests that they actually do. And the initial result seems to be very, very positive. Now, whether it is here to stay, whether these numbers are going to hold up or is it going to change is just anybody's guess. But I think we are trending in the right direction in terms of what's the kind of gains that are likely to happen. With that said, I think some of the key aspects that we need to look at is, how could we embrace generative AI inside an enterprise here? Now, should it be, as I said, one is a choice of model, but once you have a choice of model, should we start looking at what's the approaches that we can actually take with these LLMs? Should we use our own training data that's going to be available and train these models for our own purposes, or should we be fine tuning? Now, each of these approaches has a lot of benefit as well as some kind of the downsides that come with that. So there isn't one method that's great. But one of the things that's emerging, especially when you're actually looking at use cases like knowledge search and things like that, is a method called as RAG, which is a retrieval augmented generation. Essentially, the core principles behind this, I'm not going to get too technical with this one, but the core principle here is that imagine an organization that has a large corpus of data, which is like a knowledge management information that's available. The classic approach would be to take all of this data and actually fine-tuning your model with that particular data. Now, it sounds very intuitive, but if you look at a little more carefully, it's going to be very difficult to do that because this knowledge base is an ongoing work, which means there's going to be constant generation of newer set of data that's actually going to come in. Now, if that's going to be the case, would it be a good idea to kind of look at fine-tuning this model on a regular basis? And at what periodicity, and how do we ensure that this model is not overfitted because you have the similar set of data that's actually coming? Those are kind of questions that come. Not just that, but there's also a cost that's involved because every time you run these, you're actually pushing in input tokens into those large models, which are API based, and there's a cost to be justified. On the other hand, one of the methods that's likely to stay is this RAG method, where what we talk about is using the large language model only from a summarization standpoint, but internally use either indexing of the files, then vectorization of a database, and having that information available to the LLM only to summarize and provide that. I think this provides a lot more scalability because if you have a data source onto which you're going to be adding more data, then because you're indexing them regularly, you can access that information real time and generate a response out of the LLMs and give a meaningful response to the end user. I think that's something that's actually coming up. And I mean, each of this is evolving. And as I was mentioning this to Sarah and is that, there are a lot of questions that come up with each of these execution methods. And if anybody says I've figured it out, they may be hallucinating. I'm not saying this in a very condescending way. It's more about as and when we think that we've solved something, a new area emerges, which are potentially a new set of problems that are actually coming in. So I'm not trying to sound very prescriptive that this is the only thing that works, but what I'm trying to suggest is that this method seems to be getting a lot of interest from our own clients here, and potentially looking at how we can implement this to scale this there. Now, through this exercise, one of the things that the underlying theme that you would have realized is that what is it that enterprises are looking, what kind of decisions that they're trying to make. And the reason why I'm bringing this aspect of decision making is that there aren't any concrete answers for all these questions. There are healthy trade-offs that actually happens with each of this. You could, when you pick up a model, it's very tempting to pick up a large model, but there is an associated cost with that. Now, what also comes to that is in some of the closed models, there is a data privacy aspects that's there. The data actually goes outside the enterprise and resides there for some time before it actually moves out of that place. So how much open are enterprises to look at that? Now, as opposed to something like an open source model, which have limited capabilities, or they're still catching up big time, but may not be comparable to some of the closed source models that are there. Now, how do you answer these questions? There isn't a silver bullet for all of this. It's like a very iterative process, and I think where I'm appealing to each one of you is to start developing your own independent opinion on these topics, because the ones that are popular need not be true. I mean, each of us are all figuring out in our own ways what's the right way to approach this, and I think we have an opportunity to dive deep into this particular space and get some answers which are very based on our experiences, as opposed to some borrowed knowledge that's actually coming from. So I said, even in this conversation, I don't want to come across as somebody who says, okay, I understand all of this, how it works and all that. Maybe it's just we just scratching the surface and all of this, and there are more questions that will emerge. Now, which brings us to the point that within an enterprise, it's not so much just about a model, but a very holistic change which happens within the ecosystem, which is the CDO or the CIO have many questions to answer in terms of what is their organization's posture on generative AI, to what should be an architecture that they should look at. I mean, I'm actually borrowing this from what McKinsey actually said, and rightfully so, because what McKinsey says is it's not just a choice of model and integrating that into a particular stream of work, but it's actually more a cultural change that we are actually looking at different levels. Even the kind of roles that are likely to emerge out of this one are going to be very, very unique. Like how much time are people going to spend time investing on fine-tuning models? Is that a skill that you're actually on? Prompt engineering is actually a great skill, because the quality of the prompt pretty much determines the quality of the output as far as some of these LLMs that are there. So new skills are likely to emerge, and I think it's only our openness to learning them which will make a big difference here. And that's it. I have a couple of more slides there, but I just want to make sure we're connecting, and if you have any questions there before we move on. Sarah, any questions so far?
That's awesome. Thank you, Rajesh. There are a couple of questions in the chat, so maybe we can just start with the Q&A now, and then if you want to go back into a couple of slides, if some of them are relevant, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. So we'll start with Preet's question. So thank you for this session, Rajesh. One question that is on my mind these days is, how does one stay up to date with so many new developments in the AI industry? Do you have any recommendations on any good resources or any best practices?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think staying up to date is a very effortful task, because there's so many sources of information. Like any of I'm not able to suggest an explicit filter mechanism, but I can suggest with you what's the way that I normally do. I have, I follow a few people on Substack, and there is a detailed expositions that comes either in Medium, Substack, or any of these leading blogs and things like that, where cutting edge work gets written. I think once you start reading and something is to your liking, you kind of use that as a basis to move forward. But the one thing that I would strongly discourage is just not just consume this as news or any form of information snippets, because what I think will happen is that as more and more people are generating content, they end up being consumed in a very shallow manner. I think what is required is depth. To that extent, engaging with people who are practitioners, reading from experts that are there, some serious expositions on these topics are probably the methods that I would recommend, as opposed to just using this a method of consumption like a news or something like that. So I might not have answered your question, because I said my methods could be very different from yours. For me, it is more about following experts and talking to them, engaging in detailed discussions, and then using that as a basis to formulate my own thought process. And even writing my own stuff actually helps me solidify the proposition there.
Awesome. And we do have another question from Tamina. So thank you for this session. Are there any industries that you see as particularly well positioned to take advantage of Gen AI in the enterprise space, especially when it relates to infrastructure readiness?
Traditionally, the high-tech companies have always been at the forefront of all of this. It's because they are the ones that work on some of these large language models and things like that. So they will naturally be. But I think this particular foundational capability is not built for them to consume. They're actually making this available for others to actually build services on top of that. So to that extent, you will see that areas like banking or insurance open up big time, because it creates new opportunities of engagements with customers or within employee bases and things like that. So I think from an infrastructure readiness standpoint, I can only imagine that high tech is already there. But regulated industries, I think the key question is not just the infrastructure, but it's also how much that industry is regulated, like how much of say information sensitivity exists. So I think that will be another angle to look at. To that extent, the upsides are great, and people will find a way to solve those problems when it comes to privacy, data privacy, and things like that. So yeah, since I work in the banking and financial services space, I see there's a lot of opportunity there, and customers have been very forthcoming about embracing generative AI within the enterprise there.
Awesome. And we do have another question from Divya. So thank you, Rajesh, for a great presentation. What are your thoughts on data privacy while using open access generative AI? Isn't this one of the greatest challenges for the industry, where privacy is a great concern?
It does. And I think we'll probably have to be very nuanced about this one, because did you say OpenAI was the
open access generative AI? So
okay. No, I'm assuming we're referring to OpenAI because that's a model that's accessed via API. No, the terms of service are extremely important for us to understand. So if you take ChatGPT, which is probably a good example that everybody takes, that it's publicly available. So which means the data can be used there. But some of these large models, when they are within their VPC, the terms of privacy can be written differently, which is, your privacy can be ensured for an enterprise for them to engage with those models. Having said that, I think that's where the open source models actually are coming out big time, because these models are going to be residing inside your enterprise, accessing only your data. It doesn't go out anywhere. So there are enough guardrails that are being put in place, and I think more. So it's like this. People have seen convenience and value out of this one. If privacy is the only sore point, they'll kind of address that. And open source models, as well as some of these large language models, when they are actually available within the enterprise structure, you would see that they're not compromised. So if one were to just look at something like ChatGPT, yeah, absolutely. I think the terms of service are absolutely clear. They're going to use those data there. But outside of that, if you work with Microsoft or any of those large organizations, they do care about privacy, and they've built in enough guardrails to solve that problem.
great question. We have another one. So what are your thoughts around evolving Gen AI in the framework of responsible AI?
It's a very deep question, and quite honestly, I don't want to sound I understand that fully, and I want to say that because responsible AI starts with how much are we in control of what is getting generated, what data has been fed. These are still early days. I wish I had a very concrete answer for that, but I will, I'll probably take note of that, and I'll come back to you with a better answer at this point. And maybe, I don't have a concrete answer, so I just probably want to reflect that for now.
I also have a question as well, Rajesh. I found the prompt the model experiment that you walked through very interesting, and the different frameworks that you put up with the shaper versus maker models. I just have a question as someone who kind of starts with building a POC and the steps toward making your way into a production system. How early do you want to start thinking about scaling and performance during those early days in POC? Like, have you seen an industry and the work that you've done that it's important to consider that during those stages, or is the goal ultimately just should this even be something we think about scaling?
We will, yeah, it's a good question, Sarah. I think what we have done is, I'm sure there are multiple ways to look at this, is one is as we go through those experiments and we start looking at implementing it for a few use cases, we start looking at adjacent spaces and areas where there are new use cases that are likely to come. So that way, when we're trying to build an architectural approach to this one, we just don't look at it for the set of use cases that we're looking at, but we start looking at for every other adjacent space and the areas that are likely to emerge. And that way, you're not creating something only for that particular specific task. So there are different ways to look at it, but I think we found success with this approach. And that, so for example, there's a particular client engagement that we work on right now. We are about to finish the experiment. They are actually talking to us about scaling this for about 1,000 users to start with. And we don't know what kind of use cases are going to come. So which means we've laid on the possible set of use cases and then start building a solution that will handle these kind of scenarios, and then look to scale them.
Thank you. We do have another question from Nidhi. So while implementing these solutions on to the customer enterprise, does it take a level of educating them as well? If yes, does this usually fall on you as consultants? And to what extent does this take place? From scratching the surface about how it works, or just the usage of the implementation?
No, if I understand your question correctly, what you're saying is it the responsibility of the consulting company to educate the customers through this journey? The answer is absolutely yes, because there's a lot of responsibility that exists in this job. Like, right from not just the commercial benefits that one can get, but also in terms of what can go wrong with this. How do we put those guardrails? Because there is somebody who's making a decision on behalf of you for this one. And I think if we sidestep that process, what's likely to happen is there's something called as defensive decision making that's likely to happen, which is to say people may the default decision is to not do it as opposed to do this. This technology has transformative capability. I think so. The way I look at it is, I think it's my personal responsibility. Whenever I work with my customers, I kind of give them on not just the positives, but also the areas that are gray, which we could potentially dig more and get answers, and then have total clarity before we get that. It's absolutely a responsibility, without a doubt.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rajesh. So those are the questions for now. If you'd like to hop into your slides, I don't know if you still have a couple more slides left to go through.
I do, but I was just hoping, we should do the Q&A in this context and then see if there is any more that's coming up, and I can actually change my slides accordingly. That's probably the reason.
Absolutely. So I'll just give one last call for any questions in the chat. Thank you so much for engaging so far. Been a great conversation.
No, I have a question for you, Sarah. So it's like, what's been your experience with responsibility? I think it's a question that I don't want to move past. So as much as I didn't give it a thought to explain that clearly, I think it's a question that's worth discussing this. What's been your experience with that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it is an interesting, large question. I think from my team's perspective, I'll just speak to how we're thinking about it. So my team is focused on healthcare, home healthcare solutions, and working with Gen AI solutions to make sure that we can provide more efficient home healthcare for caregivers and for patients at home. And so responsible AI for us touches not just on the experience for the patient, so making sure that whatever solutions we're coming up with, it is aligned and making sure that it's with the ultimate goal of making sure that they have the best care. But it also needs to touch on different policy things that are coming into place. In healthcare, there's a lot of more heavy regulations around AI, and there's a lot of bills that are being passed. We serve in a lot of different markets. So with responsible AI frameworks that continue to be molded and adjusted, I find that keeping up to date with what is the latest in terms of standardized frameworks that are applicable for healthcare, that's kind of one aspect that our team is making sure that we stay on top of, and then thinking very thoroughly about how is it that we can ensure that we have stakeholders from the very get-go that are also thinking about responsibility when we deploy these things in production. So the frameworks, I think those are things that at a company level, you do have to come up with your own responsible AI strategy, but those need to be governed and guided by what is already being discoursed kind of in policy, and with what experts are coming up with frameworks to how to think about deploying Gen AI.
And how do you, I'm sure as a part of the process, you use something called as a human in the loop, right? In the sense, when you generate a response, you really want this to be vetted by a human who's qualified enough to say whether it's giving you the right set of answers, devoid of any biases or hallucinations or anything that's unethical and things like that. Is that right?
Absolutely. That part is critical during training, during validation. And so we ensure that for us, our clinicians and individuals that are informed and those stakeholders are involved every step of the way during that part of the process. So for sure, there's responsibility that has to be thought out throughout the entire technical implementation. But I think particularly in the beginning, when you're kind of setting the stage for business context as to why we're going to be building this AI solution, and until the end when it's deployed and live in production, you have to continuously think about that framework of how you're being responsible with from training, from data collection to deployment. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I think human in the loop is one method. Another thing that we kind of look at is also, because once we have to scale, just having a human in the loop is not sufficient, because there could be many scenarios in which could come and it could miss the human eye. Now, there is an element of post-processing that we kind of look at, in the sense, once your response is formulated, you kind of have explicit checks to find out if the answers are reasonably right in relation to the question, or how much of hallucination exists, and all of that actually gets checked at that level in the form of post-processing before we actually even allow the responses to be sent out there. So, there are a couple of things that came to my mind, so I just thought I'll explore those thoughts with you. So, yeah. So, yeah, once again, as I said, the core theme of this presentation through and through, what I was wanting to say is there are tons of opportunities. So each of the questions that you asked right now is an area to be explored. Whether it's ethics, there are people who spend a lifetime trying to understand what's the ethics with the AI, how does it make decisions and things like that. Likewise, this responsible AI is another question. So each of these questions is a space. And what I was trying to articulate is there is increased demand, which is actually getting pushed through, foundational capabilities that's getting built, and the enterprises' need for embracing this kind of technology into their daily work. So I think with that comes a lot of questions, because this is totally new. And I think our responsibility as practitioners, as well as, consulting in whatever capacity that you are, is not just to build solution, but also to be able to convince a stakeholder as to what the pros and cons of it. So which means our ability to read across the aisle and then figure out not just the positives of what works with this, but also to look at the downsides and how do we mitigate, is part of the responsibility that you have in this endeavor. So I'm just appealing to you, saying that I think we just have to see across the fence and then say what works and what doesn't work, and how do we actually build those right kind of guardrails there. So purely as McKinsey would see is this, there are enough opportunities that are actually emerging. One is building services on top using generative AI, the applications that are there. The model ML ops is another area that's growing up big, because it's all about fine-tuning those models, the number of epochs that needs to be run for you to get this model to be fine-tuned for this particular task that you're looking at. So in fact, Sarah was asking about model fitting and things like that. And it's still an art form. So there is enough opportunities for all of us to explore those areas. Foundational model is another one. They say, is there an opportunity for an enterprise to take and build their own foundational model, like the way Bloomberg built? I think there is an opportunity for us to explore different areas, either in solution building or ML ops or foundational models or even prompt engineering, for the matter of fact. And there are newer roles that are likely to emerge. I don't know, somebody asked this question about engaging with the stakeholder. I think even that is a form of a skill that we have to look at in terms of arriving at the right kind of use cases, building out a solution for them, explaining the pros and cons of what works and what doesn't work. If that as an engagement, or the area that we are also looking at is something like a chat UX, or where, the moment you start putting out a lot of text without any multimodal input, you'll see there's something called as a heading adaptation that will actually happen. People get used to this responsive, and eventually they'll start. Imagine if you put out a prompt query on ChatGPT, it just throws up 20 lines of text. It's very difficult for you to read all of this and assimilate that information over a period of time. So what can you do to make these experiences interesting is another area of another skill that will emerge. And I'm sure there are people who are already working on chat UX for generative AI and things like that. So this space is here to stay, is my personal opinion. I think there's a lot going to be built using this one. There's enough resources that are getting pumped into this one. It's for us to stay active, stay curious, and then engage with the right kind of people to build our own tool sets to build solution and make the best out of it. So those are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share for today. I hope some of them might resonate with you. Some of them might be questions that you have. I just wanted to be very clear. The one thing that I want to say is there aren't any concrete answers in this one. It's for us to explore and figure out our own answers in the process there. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Nammi and Sarah. I really enjoyed talking to this particular team, and looking forward to future discussions and engagements where you can be a part of and socialize some of these thoughts here.
Thank you so much, Rajesh, for this amazing and insightful session.